What's up guys, Lifting here. In this video I'm going to give you a build guide to the summoner that I played very recently. It's a skeleton mage, zombie and spectre summoner, and it uses 1 Wickerman Spectre and 3 Tukohamas vanguards. I've played this build to around level 93. Overall I actually consider the build very successful, and it definitely lived up to my hopes and expectations, and I've been able to kill the Guardians and Shaper, and it's actually been pretty easy. Like the damage of the Spectres and the combination with the Skeletons, that damage is so good, and that makes those encounters so much more easier. The zombies is mostly there for like meat shield protection and such, but the Spectres and Skeletons, they deal a nice amount of damage. The nice combination with those two is that the Skeletons have an incredibly large range on their spells, and that gives good clear speed. And the Spectres gives a bit of clear speed with the Wickerman dealing fire damage around it, kind of like Righteous Fire, and then the Tukohama Vanguards are putting up those Scorching Ray totems, and they absolutely destroy bosses. I play this build as CI, and I do that because that has a more efficient skill tree, and also because I kind of wanted to see if CI still felt good, and it felt pretty good. I it didn't feel lackluster or anything. It does require a certain amount of skill point investment, and you of course have to get some pretty nice rolls on gear, as you always should. And you will have less than you would have before, but still you're able to get a decent amount or good amount of energy shield, and it just makes more sense with this type of skill tree here. I'd also say that the build is fairly budget friendly if you exclude the 2 required Dead Reckoning jewels. They have increased a lot in price recently, and they're much more expensive on hardcore than they are in softcore. But I'm not going to give you a price because the price can of course fluctuate. But look them up, they can be a little expensive, especially in hardcore. I'm also using a 6-link on my Skeletons right now, but that is not necessary at all. The Skeletons will do more than fine on a 5-link, and my Spectres is even just on a 5-link, and the damage is still really good. And I guess the nice thing about CI not being too popular right now is that the gear, although there's not as much available as there were before, but it's also much cheaper. So I actually don't think the build is too hard to gear or too expensive to gear, but you need those 2 Dead Reckoning. The way I leveled this, and it felt pretty smooth, was by using SRS to begin with. Then when I had my 2 Dead Reckoning, I started using my Skeletons, and you can use it together with your SRS if you want that. And it feels really smooth, it's super easy. And eventually you just add in the Spectres as you get to the right zones where you can spawn them. But Spectres is more like a later thing, and it's not really necessary in the beginning. But there's some fairly detailed information on how to level the character in the forum guide. I definitely suggest that you check this out. Oh, and there's the nice thing of the build being able to run pretty much any map mod that I can think of, with the exception of No Region. With No Region you would have to swap in a mana flask, then you could do it. But other than that, you can pretty much run everything. Even Chain when you have the right Pantheon set up for it. Now that all sounds nice, right? But what about the downsides? The downsides of this build, I'd say, is that minion AI can sometimes be a little ridiculous. Especially melee minions. And the way we try to fix that is by increasing their movement speed drastically. With more movement speed, the AI, or the lackluster AI, you kind of make up for it that way. But you will sometimes be looking at your zombies and thinking, why the fuck are you not attacking the enemy right next to us? But yeah, that's how it is. Fortunately, because we're using the Skeleton mages and they're ranged, it's not an issue in those cases, and the Spectres feel pretty good too. The Wickerman with its fire damage around it doesn't matter too much if it actually runs over and uses its Molten Strike, because it's still dealing the the damage around it as long as it is close to the enemies. And that's why it's really nice with that movement speed, because your zombies gets closer and faster to the targets, and that helps with the meat shield and damage, I guess, and the same for the Wickermans. Another thing is that the Spectre system will sometimes leave you incredibly frustrated. I'm going to show you how to spawn the Spectres in just a bit, but the biggest problem is that if you got all your Spectres up and running and you get a disconnect, you'll have to do it again. And it's sometimes a little tedious process, a lot of micromanagement and things like that. But the nice thing is that, at least with this setup here, your Spectres never die. They never die, at least when you get to like higher points in the game, even against the Shaper. So that's not something to worry about, at least. You could of course also argue that there are builds with faster clear speed. That's just how it is. The build is or by no means slow, but it's not one of those high attack speed farming builds, of course. Another thing is that there is no room for cast when damage taking Immortal Call in the setup. That means that porcupines can be pretty dangerous, especially with damage map mods. To make up for that, you have your zombies, and the zombies will often, or your minions in general, will often be in front of you and take some of that damage. I didn't die to it, but there's been a few close encounters with it. That's where a spell such as Convocation gets useful. If you see the minions, you convocate. That's correct English. And then the minions will get to you and protect you, and then you absorb some of the damage that way. But it can be a little dangerous, so be careful with that when you see it. Finally, I should say that summoners are incredibly complex. It's probably, or at least in my opinion, probably the hardest type of build to set up in Path of Exile, and to really find that optimal setup for, because you have to really understand how aura and management, mana management works. You have to understand the importance of links, and because there is so many links you need and so many gems you need, you have to leave out other stuff. For instance, that cast when damage taking setup. And it can be a little frustrating if you're new to the game. So if you're completely new to Path of Exile, don't do this as your first build. Try to get a bit of basic understanding of how the game works first. If you are a more advanced player, then you'll do fine. Alright, let's take a look at the Ascendancy that we use for this. We're playing as the Necromancer, and we're picking up Command of Darkness for more damage, and also 20 to all elemental resistances. That makes gearing easier. Keep in mind though that for that to be on, you have to have an aura active, and that aura needs to be affecting you. So in a case such as this, when I'm using Anger with Generosity, that doesn't influence my character, I'm not going to get that buff. But when I turn on Discipline, for instance, which influences my character, then the buffs will apply. We're using Fleshbinder, and that's without a doubt the weakest of all the Ascendancies. It's fine, you get 1% additional physical damage mitigation for each zombie you own, and we get up to 8 or 9 depending on the setup. And that's equivalent to 2 endurance charges, right? So it's okay, but still one of the weakest. Then we get Soul Weaver, and that is pretty much what makes your Spectres pretty much immortal, even against the Shaper and such. They make them so tanky, and the damage boost is just so good. And finally, Spirit Eater, and that's mostly just because of the minion damage. Pretty straightforward. But yeah, this is also the order: Command of Darkness, Fleshbinder, Spectre, and then Spirit Eater. Now let's take a look at the gear that we're running here. The only strictly requiring uniques for this build is the Dead Reckoning Jewels, and I have that here. Minions have 10% to all elemental resistances. That's nice. But the important thing is that with at least 40 intelligence in radius, summon Skeleton, or Skeleton Gem, where is it? Up here. It can summon up to 5 Skeleton Mages. So instead of giving you Skeleton Warriors, it will be skeleton mages. It basically converts them. And you need 2 of these jewels. For this setup, we're running with 9 skeleton mages. And that's because that's what make the most sense in the skill tree, makes it most efficient, and it provides the best balance. So a Dead Reckoning here and a Dead Reckoning up here, that's where it fits. I'm also using Valerium, and that's to prevent getting stunned when I'm CI. You can also use an Eye of Cheula if you want, or even a Kiara's Determination. I recommend you go for Valerium. You get quite a lot of extra resistances in this, and the amulet socket can provide a lot of energy shield, more than a ring can provide. So I'd suggest Valerium, but it's up to you. Then we're using Bones of Ulor, and I actually didn't do that for a very long time. I only swapped those in very late, so don't worry about it if you have trouble getting enough ES until later. But we use that because it gives us 1 more zombie and 1 more Spectre. And since the Spectres is as powerful as they are, 1 more Spectre can make a very big difference. Then I'm using the Queen's Escape. That's the upgraded version of the sword. The Queen's Escape, I can't remember what the not upgraded version is, or the name of it. But with this we gain minion life, we gain a ton of movement speed, and this is what I talked about before. This kind of solves some of the shitty AI situations that are in the game, and gives an indirect defense and damage boost by allowing the minions to get closer to your enemies. Then it gives a ton of increased skeleton duration, and with this, my skeleton mages have a duration of 59.60 seconds. It also gives some minion damage, and then very importantly near the end, +1 to zombies, specters, and skeletons. So overall, a pretty powerful weapon to use. It comes with the downside of not being able to use a shield, and not being able to use a shield on a CI build. That means you have to make up for the lost energy shield on your other parts of the gear. So you need to get high energy shield rolls on your gloves, your helmet. I could get a higher roll on this, and that'd be nice. Your belt, ring, and amulets, and of course your chest too. And as for the rare items, the only thing you really have to focus on is getting that high ES, getting enough resists, maybe a bit of attributes if you're having trouble leveling your gems. But on your helmet you also want 2+ to the level of socketed minion gems, because it is in that setup we have our zombies, and 2+ to levels of that makes a big difference health wise, and also some damage wise. But again, we don't really use it for damage, but we want them to survive, and it makes a big difference. And I probably should say there's no expensive 2 dust jewels in this setup here. And I decided, originally I wanted that. They give a lot of skeleton damage, but since this is just as much as Spectre and kind of zombie build too, I opted into just getting regular type of jewels with, where is it? Things such as energy shield and minion damage, and then whatever you need besides that. I feel that it's a more balanced approach, but if you really want to, if you're playing softcore, if you don't need the extra energy shield, then yeah, maybe consider getting them. But they will also give more damage to the other minions. But this is a bit more like balanced approach. As for the flasks, there's 2 important things I feel that needs to be mentioned. I'd recommend you use a ruby flask. And the reason I recommend that is because when you play as a summoner, there's so much crap going on the screen. And sometimes, out of the blue, there's a volatile, and you sometimes you won't see it until it's fairly close. By pressing the ruby flask here, you'll be protected against that. And also, since 3.0, it's only fire volatiles now, so a ruby flask will protect you against those. It makes a big difference. It saved me a couple of times. Basalt and granite flask, just regular fizz mitigation. Quartz flask is really nice because it resets aggro, and that can be very useful as a summoner when you want to lose it and you want the enemies to attack your minions. It it's not always 100% reliable, but it does make a nice difference, especially in something like beachhead farming, where things can get a little clutch. And then, of course, just a quicksilver for movements. But now I'm going to show you how to get the Spectres. There's much more detailed Spectre information in the forum guide, and I really suggest you read that, otherwise you'll be at a pretty big disadvantage. But I'm quickly going to show you how to get them. So the Spectres we want to use are Wickermans, and it is Tukuhama Vanguards. To get those, you need to go to the coast area. In the coast area, we can get the Tukuhama Vanguards. And when you're in the coast area, you will use Desecrate a couple of times. You hold down A on the keyboard, and that can highlight them. And you can see here is, oh, that was the Tukuhama Warrior. We're looking for the Vanguard. There's a Tukuhama's Vanguard here, and then you raise that as your Spectre. Now, if you're low level and or around level 45 and before maps in general, you should just raise as many Vanguards as you can and still have room for that Wickerman later when you get there. But if you're in maps and want to get the most powerful of them, you only want to raise one. And right now we have one Vanguard. And then we'll go to Act 10 and we want to go into the canals. So we'll go to Ravaged Square first and run to the canals. And in the canals, we will use the same method of raising one Wickerman Spectre, and then I'll show you what we do after that. So Desecrate, Desecrate, and there's a Wickerman here. It's the big bloated guys you can typically find, and you'll raise one of those. So now we have these two Spectres up. Now, in order to get the Spectres as powerful as possible, you want to get them from as high level maps as you can. It is important to note though that Spectres get downscaled to the content you're in. So even if you get like really high level Spectres, and you then start to farm a level 60 zone, they will get downscaled to that. But if you get high level Spectres and you're in high level content, they will fully benefit from that high level of them. So try to get your Spectres as high level as possible if you're doing high level content. And to do that, the most powerful Spectres I've been using and running around with can be found in Forge of the Phoenix. Now I need my map device here. We'll go into Forge of the Phoenix. And because I now have one Wickerman and one Tukuhama's Vanguard, I can use Desecrate in here. And I can now spawn those corpses in here at that high level. If you don't have the Tukuhama Vanguard and the Wickerman before going in here, they will not be able to spawn. So you need to get one of those to add them to the Desecrate table. And so, for instance, you can see that here's a high-level Wickerman. We'll raise that, and then we want to find 3 Tukuhama's Vanguards now. And I don't know if they are here. Sometimes this is kind of what I mean by the Spectre system can being a little frustrating to use sometimes, because it can take a bit of time to find the right corpses. But if you do it in the right type of maps, you will eventually always end up finding them. So I'll just see if I can find this here. And here's one Tukuhama Vanguard, then we just want 3 more. And there's the 3rd one. So now we have one Wickerman, very high level, level 83 Wickerman. These are incredibly powerful, and the same goes for the Vanguards. At earlier levels, you want to go into more appropriately leveled maps, but if you want to do Shaper and such, I definitely recommend you get them in this zone here, so you can get them as strong and powerful as possible. But in the forum guide, I have made a list of maps from tier 4 and down to this that you can check out, so you can see which maps you can find these in, as long as you get them before you go into the map one of each. Now let me show you the skill gem setup. We're going to start with the skeletons. So I'm using Summon Skeleton, and if you really want, you could try and wall it and get level to level 21, that'd be sick. But Summon Skeleton with Empower, Pierce, it's pretty important, Spell Echo, Minion Damage, and lesser multiple projectiles. You can also use greater multiple projectiles if you prefer. It gives it a little more spread on the projectiles, but I really haven't found it to be necessary. They will cover more than enough with just LMP, and they will have higher damage, but it's up to you. Empower, I decided on using as the 6th link because it was very hard to get 4 blue sockets on the sword here. Had I gotten 4 blue sockets, then I would instead have used Controlled Destruction as the 6th link. The Spectre setup is Race Spectre, Elemental Focus, Minion and Totem Elemental Resistances, and the reason we choose this is that it is one of those gems that works both for the Wickerman and the Tukuhama. It both influences all types of damage that these Spectres do, and it was changed so that this gem here also gives damage, not just resistances, and it is a more multiplier, so it actually gives a decent amount of damage. Then minion damage support, of course, and burning damage. Oh, and one thing to be said about this one here, we are pretty much capping the resists without it, but together with this also makes it so that your Spectres in elemental weakness maps have a little more survivability there. And in the final socket down here, and this is pretty important, this is why I on purpose decided not to use a 6th link. Here I'm putting Convocation, because there's no other place except for one, and that is if you get a really good onset ring that covers like your energy shield need, your resistance need, and your attributes need. If you get that, you can put Convocation in there and 6th link your Spectres if you want, but the damage is more than enough with just a 5 link, and the 6th link is not going to make that big of a difference, honestly, in practicality at least. But until you get that, then I definitely suggest that you have a 6-socket chest, 5 link for your Spectres, and Convocation for your 6th socket. Without Convocation, yeah, it can get a little annoying sometimes. Then we have our zombies here in the 2+ helmets, and since these only pretty much function as meat shields, I have only linked them with minion life. And at their current stage, a zombie has 7,000 or 17,438 life. And they will sometimes still die to like heavy AoE elemental attacks from bosses. But for the most part, they're pretty good and they're easy to raise. It's not an issue. So other than that, I also have my Generosity and Anger set up here. And Anger gives flat added fire damage that greatly benefits the skeletons and also partly the Spectres. And when it's linked with Generosity, it becomes more powerful, but it doesn't influence your character, but that's fine, we don't need the damage rights. Then as utility, I'm using Flesh Offering, so that when we use this on a corpse, our minions get a lot of attack, cast, and movement speed. I'm using Vault Discipline. This is very, very useful in those clutch situations. I'm using Desecrate for when I want to get my Spectres raised, or in those situations where there are no corpses being generated, but I still want to use Flesh Offering. An example of that can be the Shape of Light, for instance, for the most part at least. But for just general mapping, I'll take out Desecrate and I will add in Wall Haste. And then I'm using it with increased duration. Finally, I'm using Ball Lightning linked with Curse on Hits, Elemental Weakness, and then Discipline down here. Discipline for more energy shield, that's pretty straightforward. But the Ball Lightning approach here, that will apply Elemental Weakness onto the target that we attack, reducing their resistances, making our minions deal more damage, right? And it also serves to proc Elemental Equilibrium, which makes it so that the monsters will become more resistant towards lightning damage, but less resistant to cold and fire. And that of course greatly increases the damage of the fire spectres we have, and the fire skeletons and the cold skeletons. The lightning skeletons, they will have slightly reduced damage, but since this is on top of elemental weakness, which already reduces their resistance, you almost nullify that 9% resist it gets here. So it's not a big deal. Big deal. Big deal. As for the skill tree, it is a CI build. That means that our life becomes 1, but instead we just scale energy shield. And with CI we also became immune to chaos damage, which is very, very nice. There's some very dangerous chaos damage monsters plus tier 14, 15 that can, well, reduce your life to very low numbers. But with this, it makes it much safer. Chaos inoculation feels pretty good. I'm also making sure to pick up minion damage nodes, of course, to scale the damage. And up here, with Death Attunement, we can spawn 1 more Spectre that's very powerful. And with Lord of the Dead, Bird of the Flock, Puppet Master, and Grave Pack down here, they will give us additional zombies and skeletons. And until very, very late in the character's progression, I didn't pick up any minion life nodes because it's simply not necessary. But I got it to the point where I didn't really know what else to put points into at level 93. So minion life nodes are decent too, but it should always be your priority to go for minion damage first, because they are pretty tanky by themselves. But one important thing to say here is that in the beginning, you really want to rush, not make it your first priority, but try to get over here pretty soon and get that 1.5% life regen per second minion node. That will make your zombies and any minion much more reliable. Otherwise, in between fights, they're not going to regen up and they will eventually just get worn down in between. So try to get that pretty fast. It makes a big difference. The same goes for this one up here. And I'm also getting Shaper, and that's pretty much just for the mana regen. Without it, you will sometimes run a little dry when you spawn a lot of skeletons and you use curses, desecrate, or flesh offering, and so forth. And then one thing I really like about the build that also makes it easier to gear is that I'm using the Faith and Steel node, I'm using the Nullification node, and Void Barrier. These all give 8 to all elemental resistances, so 24 in total. That on top of the Ascendancy Command of Darkness that gives you 20, you get 44 to all elemental resistances, which means that it's much easier to cover those requirements on your gear, making it cheaper too. And there are leveling skill trees in the forum guide too, so check those out, guys, if you're in doubt on how to do it. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention auras. We're picking up things such as leadership, influence, and sovereignty over here for more aura effectiveness and area of effect. So minions, when they're far away, will still be influenced by it, and also so that the auras are more powerful and give more damage and more survivability in terms of ES, for instance. And for the bandit quest rewards, you kill them all for the 2 extra skill points. Or alternatively, if you want, you can decide to help Alera and get that flat mana regen, which is kind of nice for some sustain, but also the 15 to all elemental resistance is making it even easier to gear. That would give you 59% to all elemental resists. Now make sure to check the forum guide, guys. There is a lot of info there, lots of tips that will make it well, a little easier for you guys if you want to get started with this. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're interested in more Path of Exile content. Come visit me on Twitch too. The link to that is below in the description. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?